This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Chris Hawk, Stavanger, Norway. chrishawk.net. The Odyssey by Homer, translated by Samuel Butler. Book 22. Then Ulysses tore off his rags and sprang onto the broad pavement with his bow and his quiver full of arrows. He shed the arrows onto the ground at his feet and said, "The mighty contest is at an end. I will now see whether Apollo will vouchsafe it to me to hit another mark, which no man has yet hit." On this he aimed a deadly arrow at Antinous, who was about to take up a two-handed gold cup to drink his wine, and already had it in his hands. He had no thought of death. Who amongst all the revellers would think that one man, however brave, would stand alone among so many and kill him? The arrow struck Antinous in the throat, and the point went clean through his neck, so that he fell over and the cup dropped from his hand, while a thick stream of blood gushed from his nostrils. He kicked the table from him and upset the things on it, so that the bread and roasted meats were all soiled as they fell over onto the ground. The suitors were in an uproar when they saw that a man had been hit. They sprang in dismay, one and all of them, from their seats and looked everywhere towards the walls. But there was neither shield nor spear, and they rebuked Ulysses very angrily. "Stranger," said they, "you shall pay for shooting people in this way. You shall see no other contest. You are a doomed man. He whom you have slain was the foremost youth in Ithaca, and the vultures shall devour you for having killed him." Thus they spoke, for they thought that he had killed Antinous by mistake, and did not perceive that death was hanging over the head of every one of them. But Ulysses glared at them and said, "Dogs, did you think that I should not come back from Troy? You have wasted my substance, have forced my women servants to lie with you, and have wooed my wife while I was still living. You have feared neither God nor man, and now you shall die." They turned pale with fear as he spoke, and every man looked round to see whither he might fly for safety. But Eurymachus alone spoke. "If you are Ulysses," said he, "then what you have said is just. We have done much wrong on your lands and in your house. But Antinous, who was the head and front of the offending, lies low already. It was all his doing. It was not that he wanted to marry Penelope. He did not so much care about that. What he wanted was something quite different, and Jove has not vouchsafed it to him. He wanted to kill your son, and to be chief man in Ithaca. Now, therefore, that he has met the death which was his due, spare the lives of your people. We will make everything good among ourselves, and pay you in full for all that we have eaten and drunk. Each one of us shall pay you a fine worth 20 oxen, and we will keep on giving you gold and bronze, till your heart is softened. Until we have done this, no one can complain of your being enraged against us." Ulysses again glared at him and said, "Though you should give me all that you have in the world, both now and all that you ever shall have, I will not stay my hand till I have paid all of you in full. You must fight or fly for your lives, and fly. Not a man of you shall." Their hearts sank as they heard him, but Eurymachus again spoke, saying, "My friends, this man will give us no quarter. He will stand where he is and shoot us down till he has killed every man among us. Let us then show fight. Draw your swords, and hold up the tables to shield you from his arrows. Let us have at him with a rush, to drive him from the pavement and doorway. We can then get through into the town, and raise such an alarm as shall soon stay his shooting." As he spoke, he drew his keen blade of bronze, sharpened on both sides, and with a loud cry sprang towards Ulysses. But Ulysses instantly shot an arrow into his breast that caught him by the nipple and fixed itself in his liver. He dropped his sword and fell doubled over his table. The cup and all the meats went over onto the ground as he smote the earth with his forehead in the agonies of death, and he kicked the stool with his feet until his eyes were closed in darkness. Then Amphinomus drew his sword and made straight at Ulysses to try to get him away from the door, but Telemachus was too quick for him and struck him from behind. The spear caught him between the shoulders and went right through his chest, so that he fell heavily to the ground and struck the earth with his forehead. Then Telemachus sprang away from him, leaving his spear still in the body, for he feared that if he stayed to draw it out, some of the Achaeans might come up and hack at him with a sword, or knock him down. So he set off at a run, and immediately was at his father's side. Then he said, "Father, let me bring you a shield, 2 spears, and a brass helmet for your temples. I will arm myself as well, and bring other armor for the swineherd and the stockman, for we had better be armed."
"Run and fetch them," answered Ulysses, "while my arrows hold out, or when I am alone, they may get me away from the door."
Telemachus did as his father said, and went off to the storeroom where the armor was kept. He chose 4 shields, 8 spears, and 4 brass helmets with horsehair plumes. He brought them with all speed to his father, and armed himself first, while the stockman and the swineherd also put on their armor, and took their places near Ulysses. Meanwhile, Ulysses, as long as his arrows lasted, had been shooting the suitors one by one, and they fell thick on one another. When his arrows gave out, he set the bow to stand against the end wall of the house by the doorpost, and hung a shield 4 hides thick about his shoulders. On his comely head he set his helmet, well wrought, with a crest of horsehair that nodded menacingly above it, and he grasped 2 redoubtable bronze-shod spears. Now there was a trapdoor on the wall, while at one end of the pavement there was an exit leading to a narrow passage, and this exit was closed by a well-made door. Ulysses told Philoetius to stand by this door and guard it, for only one person could attack it at a time. But Agelaus shouted out, "Cannot someone go up to the trapdoor and tell the people what is going on? Help would come at once, and we should soon make an end of this man and his shooting." "This may not be, Agelaus," answered Melanthius. "The mouth of the narrow passage is dangerously near the entrance to the outer court. One brave man could prevent any number from getting in. But I know what I will do. I will bring your arms from the storeroom, for I am sure it is there that Ulysses and his son have put them." On this, the goatherd Melanthius went by back passages to the storeroom of Ulysses' house. There he chose 12 shields, with as many helmets and spears, and brought them back as fast as he could give them to the suitors. Ulysses' heart began to fail him when he saw the suitors putting on their armor and brandishing their spears. He saw the greatness of the danger, and said to Telemachus,
"Some one of the women inside is helping the suitors against us, or it may be Melanthius."
Telemachus answered, "The fault, father, is mine, and mine only. I left the storeroom door open, and they have kept a sharper lookout than I have. Go, Eumenes, to put the door to, and see whether it is one of the women who is doing this, or whether, as I suspect, it is Melanthius, the son of Dolius." Thus did they converse. Meanwhile, Melanthius was again going to the storeroom to fetch more armor, but the swineherd saw him, and said to Ulysses, who was beside him, "Ulysses, noble son of Laertes, it is that scoundrel Melanthius, just as we suspected, who is going to the storeroom. Say, shall I kill him, if I can get the better of him,
or shall I bring him here, that you may take your own revenge for all the many wrongs that he has done in your house?"
Ulysses answered, "Telemachus and I will hold these suitors in check, no matter what they do. Go back, both of you, and bind Melanthius' hands and feet behind him. Throw him into the storeroom, and make the door fast behind you. Then fasten a noose about his body, and string him close up to the rafters from a high bearing post, that he may linger on in an agony." Thus did he speak, and they did even as he had said. They went to the storeroom, which they entered before Melanthius saw them, for he was busy searching for arms in the innermost part of the room. So the two took their stand on either side of the door and waited. By and by, Melanthius came out with a helmet in one hand and an old dry-rotted shield in the other, which had been borne by Laertes when he was young, but which had been long since thrown aside, and the straps had become unsewn. On this the two seized him, dragged him back by the hair, and threw him struggling to the ground. They bent his hands and feet well behind his back, and bound them tight together with a painful bond, as Ulysses had told them. Then they fastened a noose about his body, and strung him up from a high pillar till he was close up to the rafters. And over him did you then vaunt, O swineherd Eumaeus, saying,
"Melanthius, you will pass the night on a soft bed as you deserve. You will know very well when morning comes from the streams of Oceanus, and it is time for you to be driving in your goats for the suitors to feast on."
There, then, they left him in a very cruel bondage, and having put on their armor, they closed the door behind them, and went back to take their places by the side of Ulysses, whereon the 4 men stood in the cloister, fierce and full of fury. Nevertheless, those who were in the body of the court were still both brave and many. Then Jove's daughter Minerva came up to them, having assumed the voice and form of Mentor. Ulysses was glad when he saw her, and said, "Mentor, lend me your help, and forget not your old comrade, nor the many good turns he has done you. Besides, you are my age-mate." But all the time he felt sure it was Minerva, and the suitors from the other side raised an uproar when they saw her. Agelaus was the first to reproach her.
"Mentor," he cried, "do not let Ulysses beguile you into siding with him and fighting the suitors. This is what we will do. When we have killed these people, father and son, we will kill you too. You shall pay for it with your head. And when we have killed you, we will take all you have, indoors or out, and bring it into Hodgepot with Ulysses' property. We will not let your sons live in your house, nor your daughters, nor shall your widow continue to live in the city of Ithaca."
This made Minerva still more furious, so she scolded Ulysses very angrily.
"Ulysses," said she, "your strength and prowess are no longer what they were when you fought for 9 long years among the Trojans about the noble lady Helen. You killed many a man in those days, and it was through your stratagem that Priam's city was taken. How comes it that you are so lamentably less valiant now, that you are on your own ground, face to face with the suitors in your own house? Come on, my good fellow, stand by my side, and see how Mentor, son of Alcinous, shall fight your foes, and requite your kindnesses conferred upon him." But she would not give him full victory as yet, for she wished still further to prove his own prowess, and that of his brave son. So she flew up to one of the rafters in the roof of the cloister, and sat upon it in the form of a swallow. Meanwhile, Agelaus, son of Damastor, Eurynomus, Amphimedon, Demoptolemus, Pisander, and Polybus, son of Polyctor, bore the brunt of the fight upon the suitors' side.
Of all those who were still fighting for their lives, they were by far the most valiant, for the others had already fallen under the arrows of Ulysses. Agelaus shouted to them and said,
"My friends, he will soon have to leave off, for Mentor has gone away after having done nothing for him but brag. They are standing at the doors unsupported. Do not aim at him all at once, but 6 of you throw your spears first, and see if you cannot cover yourself with glory by killing him. When he has fallen, we need not be uneasy about the others."
They threw their spears as he bade them, but Minerva made them all of no effect. One hit the doorpost, another went against the door, the pointed shaft of another struck the wall, and as soon as they had avoided all the spears of the suitors, Ulysses said to his own men,
"My friends, I should say we too had better let drive into the middle of them, or they will crown all the harm they have done us by killing us outright."
They therefore aimed straight in front of them, and threw their spears. Ulysses killed Demoptolemus, Telemachus, Eurytus, Eumaeus, Elatus, while the stockman killed Pisander. These all bit the dust, and as the others drew back into a corner, Ulysses and his men rushed forward and regained their spears by drawing them from the bodies of the dead. The suitors now aimed a second time, but again Minerva made their weapons for the most part without effect. One hit a bearing post of the cloister, another went against the door, while the pointed shaft of another struck the wall. Still, Amphimedon just took a piece of the top skin from off Telemachus's wrist, and Ctesippus managed to graze Eumaeus' shoulder above his shield, but the spear went on and fell to the ground. Then Ulysses and his men let drive into the crowd of suitors. Ulysses hit Eurydamas, Telemachus, Amphimedon, and Eumaeus Polybus. After this, the stockman hit Ctesippus in the breast, and taunted him, saying,
"Foul-mouthed son of Polytherus, do not be so foolish as to talk wickedly another time, but let heaven direct your speech, for the gods are far stronger than men. I make you a present of this advice, to repay you for the foot which you gave Ulysses when he was begging about in his own house."
Thus spoke the stockman, and Ulysses struck the son of Damastor with a spear in close fight, while Telemachus hit Leocritus, son of Evenor, in the belly, and the dart went clean through him, so that he fell forward full on his face upon the ground. Then Minerva, from her seat on the rafter, held up her deadly aegis, and the hearts of the suitors quailed. They fled to the other end of the court, like a herd of cattle maddened by the gadfly in early summer, when the days are at their longest. As eagle-beaked, crook-taloned vultures from the mountains swoop down on the smaller birds that cower in flocks upon the ground, and kill them, for they cannot either fight or fly, and lookers-on enjoy the sport. Even so did Ulysses and his men fall upon the suitors and smite them on every side. They made a horrible groaning as their brains were being battered in, and the ground seethed with their blood. Leiodes then caught the knees of Ulysses and said,
"Ulysses, I beseech you, have mercy upon me and spare me. I never wronged any of the women in your house, either in word or deed, and I tried to stop the others. I saw them, but they would not listen, and now they are paying for their folly. I was their sacrificing priest. If you kill me, I shall die without having done anything to deserve it, and shall have got no thanks for all the good that I did."
Ulysses looked sternly at him and answered,
"If you were their sacrificing priest, you must have prayed many a time that it did be long before I got home again, and that you might marry my wife and have children by her. Therefore you shall die."
With these words he picked up the sword that Agelaus had dropped when he was being killed, and which was lying upon the ground. Then he struck Leiodes on the back of his neck, so that his head fell rolling in the dust, while he was yet speaking. The minstrel Phemius, son of Terpes, he who had been forced by the suitors to sing by them, now tried to save his life. He was standing near towards the trap-door, and held his lyre in his hand. He did not know whether to fly out of the cloister and sit down by the altar of Jove that was in the outer court, and on which both Laertes and Ulysses had offered up the thigh bones of many an ox, or whether to go straight up to Ulysses and embrace his knees. But in the end he deemed it best to embrace Ulysses' knees. So he laid his lyre on the ground between the mixing bowl and the silver-studded seat. Then, going up to Ulysses, he caught hold of his knees and said,
Ulysses, I beseech you have mercy on me and spare me. You will be sorry for it afterwards if you kill a bard who can sing both for gods and men as I can. I make all my lays myself, and heaven visits me with every kind of inspiration. I would sing to you as though you were a god. Do not therefore be in such a hurry to cut my head off. Your own son, Telemachus, will tell you that I did not want to frequent your house and sing to the suitors after their meals, but they were too many and too strong for me, so they made me.
Telemachus heard him, and at once went up to his father.
Hold,
he cried.
The man is guiltless, do him no hurt, and we will spare Medon too, who was always good to me when I was a boy, unless Philoctetes or Eumaeus has already killed him, or he has fallen in your way when you were raging about the court.
Medon caught these words of Telemachus, for he was crouching under a seat, beneath which he had hidden by covering himself up with a freshly flayed heifer's hide. So he threw off the hide, went up to Telemachus, and laid hold of his knees.
Here I am, my dear sir, said he. Stay your hand, therefore, and tell your father, or he will kill me in his rage against the suitors, for having wasted his substance and been so foolishly disrespectful to yourself.
Ulysses smiled at him and answered,
Fear not. Telemachus has saved your life, that you may know in the future and tell other people how greatly better good deeds prosper than evil ones. Go therefore outside the cloisters into the outer court, and be out of the way of the slaughter, you and the bard, while I finish my work here inside.
The pair went into the outer court as fast as they could, and sat down by Jove's great altar, looking fearfully round, and still expecting that they would be killed. Then Ulysses searched the whole court carefully over, to see if anyone had managed to hide himself, and was still living, but he found them all lying in the dust and weltering in their blood. They were like fishes, which fishermen have netted out of the sea, and thrown upon the beach to lie, gasping for water, till the heat of the sun makes an end of them. Even so were the suitors lying all huddled up, one against the other. Then Ulysses said to Telemachus,
Cool nurse Euryclea, I have something to say to her.
Telemachus went and knocked at the door of the women's room.
Make haste, said he, you old woman who have been set over all the other women in the house. Come outside, my father wishes to speak to you.
When Euryclea heard this, she unfastened the door of the women's room and came out, following Telemachus. She found Ulysses among the corpses, bespattered with blood and filth, like a lion that has just been devouring an ox, and his breast and both his cheeks are all bloody, so that he is a fearful sight. Even so was Ulysses besmirched from head to foot with gore. When she saw all the corpses and such a quantity of blood, she was beginning to cry out for joy, for she saw that a great deed had been done. But Ulysses checked her.
Old woman, said he, rejoice in silence. Restrain yourself,
and do not make any noise about it. It is an unholy thing to vaunt over dead men. Heaven's doom and their own evil deeds have brought these men to destruction, for they respected no man in the whole world, neither rich nor poor, who came near them, and they have come to a bad end as a punishment for their wickedness and folly. Now, however, tell me, which of the women in the house have misconducted themselves, and who are innocent?
I will tell you the truth, my son,
answered Euryclea.
There are 50 women in the house whom we teach to do things such as carding wool and all kinds of household work. Of these, 12 in all have misbehaved and have been wanting in respect to me, and also to Penelope. They showed no disrespect to Telemachus, for he has only lately grown, and his mother never permitted him to give orders to the female servants. But let me go upstairs and tell your wife all that has happened, for some god has been sending her to sleep.
Do not wake her yet, answered Ulysses, but tell the women who have misconducted themselves to come to me. Euryclea left the cloister to tell the women, and make them come to Ulysses. In the meanwhile, he called Telemachus, the stockman, and the swineherd. Begin, said he, to remove the dead, and make the women help you. Then get sponges and clean water to swill down the tables and seat. When you have thoroughly cleansed the whole cloisters, take the women into the space between the domed room and the wall of the outer court, and run them through with your swords till they are quite dead, and have forgotten all about love and the way in which they used to lie in secret with the suitors. On this the women came down in a body, weeping and wailing bitterly. First they carried the dead bodies out, and propped them up against one another in a gatehouse. Ulysses ordered them about, and made them do their work quickly, so they had to carry the bodies out. When they had done this, they cleaned all the tables and seats with sponges and water, while Telemachus and the 2 others shoveled up the blood and dirt from the ground, and the women carried it all away and put it out of doors. Then, when they had made the whole place quite clean and orderly, they took the women and hemmed them in the narrow space between the wall of the domed room and that of the yard, so that they could not get away. And Telemachus said to the other 2, I shall not let these women die a clean death, for they were insolent to me and my mother, and used to sleep with the suitors. So saying, he made a ship's cable fast to one of the bearing posts that supported the roof of the domed room, and secured it all around the building at a good height, lest any of the women's feet should touch the ground, and as thrushes or doves beat against a net that had been set for them in a thicket just as they were getting to their nest, and a terrible fate awaits them. Even so did the women have to put their heads in nooses one after the other, and die most miserably. Their feet moved convulsively for a while, but not for very long. As for Melanthius, they took him through the cloister into the inner court. There they cut off his nose and his ears. They drew out his vitals, and gave them to the dogs raw, and then, in their fury, they cut off his hands and his feet. When they had done this, they washed their hands and feet, and went back into the house, for all was now over. And Ulysses said to the dear old nurse Euryclea, Bring me sulphur, which cleanses all pollution, and fetch fire also, that I may burn it, and purify the cloisters. Go, moreover, and tell Penelope to come here with her attendants, and also all the maidservants that are in the house.
All that you have said is true, answered Euryclea. But let me bring you some clean clothes, a shirt and cloak. Do not keep these rags on your back any longer. It is not right.
First, light me a fire, replied Ulysses. She brought the fire and sulphur, as he had bidden her. And Ulysses thoroughly purified the cloisters and both the inner and outer courts. Then she went inside to call the women and tell them what had happened. Whereon they came from their apartment with torches in their hands, and pressed round Ulysses to embrace him, kissing his head and shoulders, and taking hold of his hands. It made him feel as if he should like to weep, for he remembered every one of them. End of Book 22.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. That's LibriVox.org. The Odyssey by Homer. Translated by Samuel Butler. Book 23. Eurycleia now went upstairs laughing to tell her mistress that her dear husband had come home. Her aged knees became young again, and her feet were nimble for joy as she went up to her mistress and bent over her head to speak with her. "Wake up, Penelope, my dear child," she exclaimed, "and see with your own eyes something that you have been wanting this long time past. Ulysses has at last indeed come home again, and has killed the suitors who were giving so much trouble in his house, eating up his estate and ill-treating his son." "My good nurse," answered Penelope, "you must be mad. The gods sometimes send some very sensible people out of their minds, and make foolish people become sensible. This is what they must have been doing with you, for you always used to be a reasonable person. Why should you thus mock me when I have trouble enough already, talking such nonsense and waking me up out of a sweet sleep that had taken possession of my eyes and closed them? I have never slept so soundly from the day my poor husband went to that city with the ill-omened name. Go back again into the woman's room. If it had been anyone else who had woke me to bring such absurd news, I should have sent her away with a severe scolding. As it is, your age shall protect you." "My dear child," answered Eurycleia, "I am not mocking you. It is quite true, as I tell you, that Ulysses is come home again. He was the stranger whom they all kept on treating so badly in the cloister. Telemachus knew all the time that he has come back, but kept his father's secret, that he might have his revenge on all these wicked people." Then Penelope sprang up from her couch, threw her arms round Eurycleia, and wept for joy. "But, my dear nurse," said she, "explain this to me. If he has really come home as you say, how did he manage to overcome the wicked suitors single-handed, seeing what a number of them there always were?" "I was not here," answered Eurycleia, "and do not know. I only heard them groaning while they were being killed. We sat huddled and crouching in a corner of the women's room, with the doors closed, till your son came to fetch me, because his father sent him. Then I found Ulysses standing over the corpses that were lying on the ground all round him, one on top of the other. You would have enjoyed it if you could have seen him standing there, all bespattered with blood and filth, and looking just like a lion. But the corpses are now all piled up in the gatehouse that is in the outer court, and Ulysses has lit a great fire to purify the house with sulphur. He has sent me to call you, so come with me, that you may both be happy together after all. For now at last the desire of your heart has been fulfilled. Your husband is come home to find both wife and son alive and well, and to take his revenge in his own house on the suitors who behaved so badly to him." "My dear nurse," said Penelope, "do not exult too confidently over all this. You know how delighted everyone would be to see Ulysses come home, more particularly myself, and the son who has been born to both of us. But what you tell me cannot be really true. It is some god who is angry with the suitors for their great wickedness, and has made an end of them, for they respected no man in the world, neither rich nor poor, who came near them, and they have come to a bad end in consequence of their iniquity. Ulysses is dead, far away from the Achaean land, and he will never return home again." Then nurse Eurycleia said, "My child, what are you talking about? But you are all hard of belief, and have made up your mind that your husband is never coming, although he is in the house and by his own fireside at this very moment. Besides, I can give you another proof. When I was washing him, I perceived the scar which the wild boar gave him, and I wanted to tell you about it, but in his wisdom he would not let me, and clapped his hands over my mouth. So come with me, and I will make this bargain with you. If I am deceiving you, you may have me killed by the most cruel death you can think of." "My dear nurse," said Penelope, "however wise you may be, you can hardly fathom the counsels of the gods. Nevertheless, we will go in search of my son, that I may see the corpses of the suitors and the man who has killed them." On this she came down from her upper room, and while doing so, she considered whether she should keep at a distance from her husband and question him, or whether she should at once go up to him and embrace him. When, however, she had crossed the stone floor of the cloister, she sat down opposite Ulysses by the fire, against the wall at right angles to that by which she had entered, while Ulysses sat near one of the bearing posts, looking upon the ground, and waiting to see what his wife would say to him when she saw him. For a long time she sat silent, and as one lost in amazement. At one moment she looked him full in the face, but then again, directly, she was misled by his shabby clothes, and failed to recognize him, till Telemachus began to reproach her, and said, "Mother, but you are so hard that I cannot call you by such a name. Why do you keep away from my father in this way? Why do you not sit by his side and begin talking to him and asking him questions? No other woman could bear to keep away from her husband when he had come back to her after 20 years of absence, and after having gone through so much. But your heart was always as hard as a stone." Penelope answered, "My son, I am so lost in astonishment that I can find no words in which either to ask questions or to answer them. I cannot even look him straight in the face. Still, if he really is Ulysses come back to his own home again, we shall get to understand one another better by and by, for there are tokens with which we two are alone acquainted, and which are hidden from all others." Ulysses smiled at this, and said to Telemachus, "Let your mother put me to any proof she likes. She will make up her mind about it presently. She rejects me for the moment, and believes me to be somebody else, because I am covered with dirt and have such bad clothes on. Let us, however, consider what we had better do next. When one man has killed another, even though he was not one who would leave many friends to take up his quarrel, the man who has killed him must still say good-bye to his friends and fly the country, whereas we have been killing the stay of a whole town, and all the picked youth of Ithaca. I would have you consider this matter." "Look to it yourself, father," answered Telemachus, "for they say you are the wisest counselor in the world, and that there is no other mortal man who can compare with you. We will follow you with right good will, nor shall you find us to fail you in so far as our strength holds out." "I will say what I think will be best," answered Ulysses. "First, wash and put your shirts on. Tell the maids also to go to their own room and dress. Phemius shall then strike up a dance tune on his lyre, so that if people outside hear, or any of the neighbors, or someone going along the street happens to notice it, they may think there is a wedding in the house, and no rumors about the death of the suitors will get about in the town before we can escape to the woods upon my own land. Once there, we will settle which of the courses heaven vouchsafes us shall seem wisest." Thus did he speak, and they did even as he had said. First they washed and put their shirts on, while the women got ready. Then Phemius took his lyre and set them all longing for sweet song and stately dance. The house re-echoed with the sound of men and women dancing, and the people outside said, "I suppose the queen has been getting married at last. She ought to be ashamed of herself for not continuing to protect her husband's property until he comes home." This was what they said, but they did not know what it was that had been happening. The upper servant, Eurynome, washed and anointed Ulysses in his own house, and gave him a shirt and cloak, while Minerva made him look taller and stronger than before. She also made the hair grow thick on the top of his head, and flow down in curls like hyacinth blossoms. She glorified him about the head and shoulders, just as a skillful workman who has studied art of all kinds under Vulcan or Minerva, and his work is full of beauty, enriches a piece of silver plate by gilding it. He came from the bath looking like one of the immortals, and sat down opposite his wife on the seat he had left. "My dear," said he, "heaven has endowed you with a heart more unyielding than woman ever yet had. No other woman could bear to keep away from her husband when he had come back to her after 20 years of absence, and after having gone through so much. But come, nurse, get a bed ready for me. I will sleep alone, for this woman has a heart as hard as iron." "My dear," said Penelope, "I have no wish to set myself up, nor to depreciate you, but I am not struck by your appearance, for I very well remember what kind of a man you were when you set sail from Ithaca. Nevertheless, Euryclea, take his bed outside the bedchamber that he himself built. Bring the bed outside this room, and put bedding upon it with fleeces, good coverlets, and blankets." She said this to try him, but Ulysses was very angry, and said, "Wife, I am much displeased at what you have just been saying. Who has been taking my bed from the place in which I left it? He must have found it a hard task, no matter how skilled a workman he was, unless some god came and helped him to shift it. There is no man living, however strong and in his prime, who could move it from its place, for it is a marvelous curiosity which I made with my very own hands. There was a young olive growing within the precincts of the house, in full vigor, and about as thick as a bearing post. I built my room round this with strong walls of stone, and a roof to cover them, and I made the doors strong and well fitting. Then I cut off the top boughs of the olive tree, and left the stump standing. This I dressed roughly, from the root upwards, and then worked with carpenter's tools well and skillfully, straightening my work by drawing a line in the wood and making it into a bed prop. I then bored a hole down the middle and made it the center post of my bed, at which I worked till I had finished it, inlaying it with gold and silver. After this I stretched a hide of crimson leather from one side of it to the other. So you shall see I know all about it, and I desire to learn whether it is still there, or whether anyone has been removing it by cutting down the olive tree at its roots." When she heard the sure proofs Ulysses now gave her, she fairly broke down. She flew weeping to his side, flung her arms about his neck, and kissed him. "Do not be angry with me, Ulysses," she cried, "you who are the wisest of mankind. We have suffered, both of us. Heaven has denied us the happiness of spending our youth and of growing old together. Do not then be aggrieved or take it amiss that I did not embrace you thus as soon as I saw you. I have been shuddering all the time through fear that someone might come here and deceive me with a lying story, for there are many very wicked people going about. Jove's daughter Helen would never have yielded herself to a man from a foreign country if she had known that the sons of Achaeans would come after her and bring her back. Heaven put it in her heart to do wrong, and she gave no thought to that sin, which has been the source of all our sorrows. Now, however, that you have convinced me by showing that you know all about our bed, which no human being has ever seen but you and I, and this single maidservant, the daughter of Actor, who was given me by my father on my marriage, and who keeps the doors of our room. Hard of belief though I have been, I can mistrust no longer." Then Ulysses in his turn melted, and wept as he clasped his dear and faithful wife to his bosom. As the sight of land is welcome to men who are swimming towards the shore, when Neptune has wrecked their ship with the fury of his winds and waves, a few alone reach the land, and these, covered with brine, are thankful when they find themselves on firm ground and out of danger. Even so was her husband welcome to her as she looked upon him, and she could not tear her two fair arms from about his neck. Indeed, they would have gone on indulging their sorrow till rosy-fingered morn appeared, had not Minerva determined otherwise, and held night back in the far west, while she would not suffer dawn to leave Oceanus, nor to yoke the two steeds, Lampus and Phaeton, that bear her onward to break the day upon mankind. At last, however, Ulysses said, "Wife, we have not yet reached the end of our troubles. I have an unknown amount of toil still to undergo. It is long and difficult, but I must go through with it, for thus the shade of Tiresias prophesied concerning me on the day when I went down into Hades to ask about my return and that of my companions. But now let us go to bed, that we may lie down and enjoy the blessed boon of sleep." "You shall go to bed as soon as you please," replied Penelope, "now that the gods have sent you home to your own good house and to your country. But as heaven has put it in your mind to speak of it, tell me about the task that lies before you. I shall have to hear about it later, so it is better I should be told at once." "My dear," answered Ulysses, "why should you press me to tell you? Still, I will not conceal it from you, though you will not like it. I do not like it myself, for Tiresias bade me travel far and wide, carrying an oar, till I came to a country where the people have never heard of the sea, and do not even mix salt with their food. They know nothing about ships, nor oars that are as the wings of a ship. He gave me this certain token, which I will not hide from you. He said that a wayfarer should meet me and ask me whether it was a winnowing shovel that I had on my shoulder. On this I was to fix my oar in the ground and sacrifice a ram, a bull and a boar to Neptune, after which I was to go home and offer hecatombs to all the gods in heaven, one after the other. As for myself, he said that death should come to me from the sea, and that my life should ebb away very gently, when I was full of years and peace of mind, and my people should bless me. All this, he said, should surely come to pass. And Penelope said, If the gods are going to vouchsafe you a happier time in your old age, you may hope then to have some respite from misfortune. Thus did they converse. Meanwhile Eurynome and the nurse took torches and made the bed ready with soft coverlets. As soon as they had laid them, the nurse went back into the house to go to her rest, leaving the bedchamber woman Eurynome to show Ulysses and Penelope to bed by torchlight. When she had conducted them to their room, she went back, and they then came joyfully to the rites of their own old bed. Telemachus, Philoetius, and the swineherd now left off dancing, and made the women leave off also. They then laid themselves down to sleep in the cloisters. When Ulysses and Penelope had had their fill of love, they fell talking with one another. She told him how much she had had to bear in seeing the house filled with a crowd of wicked suitors, who had killed so many sheep and oxen on her account, and had drunk so many casks of wine. Ulysses, in his turn, told her what he had suffered, and how much trouble he had given to other people. He told her everything, and she was so delighted to listen that she never went to sleep till he had ended his whole story. He began with the victory over Cicons, and how he thence reached the fertile land of the lotus eaters. He told her all about the Cyclops, and how he had punished him for having so ruthlessly eaten his brave comrades. How he then went on to Aeolus, who received him hospitably and furthered him on his way. And even so, he was not to reach home, for to his grief a hurricane carried him out to sea again. How he went to the Lastrygonian city Telepylus, where the people destroyed all his ships with their crews, save himself and his own ship only. Then he told of cunning Circe and her craft, and how he sailed to the chill house of Hades to consult the ghost of the Theban prophet Tiresias, and how he saw his old comrade in arms, and his mother who bore him and brought him up when he was a child. How he then heard the wondrous singing of the sirens, and went on to the wandering rocks, and terrible Charybdis, and to Scylla, whom no man had ever yet passed in safety. How his men then ate the cattle of the sun god, and how Jove, therefore, struck the ship with his thunderbolts, so that all his men perished together, himself alone being left alive. How, at last, he reached the Ogygian island, and the nymph Calypso, who kept him there in a cave, and fed him, and wanted him to marry her, in which case she intended making him immortal, so that he should never grow old. But she could not persuade him to let her do so. And how, after much suffering, he had found his way to the Phaeacians, who had treated him as though he had been a god, and sent him back in a ship to his own country, after having given him gold, bronze, and raiment in great abundance. This was the last thing about which he told her, for here a deep sleep took hold upon him and eased the burden of his sorrows. Then Minerva bethought her of another matter. When she deemed that Ulysses had had both of his wife and of repose, she bade gold-enthroned Dawn rise out of Oceanus, that she might shed light upon mankind. On this Ulysses rose from his comfortable bed and said to Penelope, "Wife, we have both of us had our full share of troubles, you here in lamenting my absence, and I in being prevented from getting home, though I was longing all the time to do so. Now, however, that we have at last come together, take care of the property that is in this house. As for the sheep and goats which the wicked suitors have eaten, I will take many myself by force from other people, and will compel the Achaeans to make good the rest, till they shall have filled all my yards. I am now going to the wooded lands out in the country to see my father, who has so long been grieved on my account, and to yourself I will give these instructions, though you have little need of them. At sunrise it will at once get abroad that I have been killing the suitors. Go upstairs, therefore, and stay there with your women. See nobody, and ask no questions." As he spoke, he girded on his armor. Then he roused Telemachus, Philotius, and Eumaeus, and told them all to put on their armor as well. This they did, and armed themselves. When they had done so, they opened the gates and sallied forth, Ulysses leading the way. It was now daylight, but Minerva nevertheless concealed them in darkness, and led them quickly out of the town. End of Book 23. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California for LibriVox. Fall 2006. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. The Odyssey, by Homer, as translated by Samuel Butler. Book 24. The Ghosts of the Suitors in Hades. Ulysses and his men go to the house of Laertes. The people of Ithaca come out to attack Ulysses, but Minerva concludes a peace. Then Mercury of Cyllene summoned the ghosts of the suitors, and in his hand he held the fair golden wand with which he seals men's eyes in sleep, or wakes them just as he pleases. With this he roused the ghosts and led them, while they followed whining and gibbering behind him. As bats fly squealing in the hollow of some great cave, when one of them has fallen out of the cluster in which they hang, even so did the ghosts whine and squeal, as Mercury, the healer of sorrow, led them down into the dark abode of death. When they had passed the waters of Oceanus and the rock Leucus, they came to the gates of the sun, and the land of dreams, whereon they reached the meadow of Asphodel, where dwell the souls and shadows of them that can labor no more. Here they found the ghost of Achilles, son of Peleus, with those of Patroclus, and Antilochus, and Ajax, who was the finest and handsomest man of all the Danaans, after the son of Peleus himself. They gathered round the ghost of the son of Peleus, and the ghost of Agamemnon joined them, sorrowing bitterly. Round him were also gathered the ghosts of those who had perished with him in the house of Aegisthus, and the ghost of Achilles spoke first. "Son of Atreus," it said, "we used to say that Jove had loved you better from the first to last than any other hero, for you were captain over many and brave men, when we were all fighting together before Troy. Yet the hand of death, which no mortal can escape, was laid upon you all too early. Better for you had you fallen at Troy in the heyday of your renown, for the Achaeans would have built a mound over your ashes, and your son would have been heir to your good name, whereas it has now been your lot to come to a most miserable end." "Happy son of Peleus," answered the ghost of Agamemnon, "for having died at Troy far from Argos, while the bravest of the Trojans and the Achaeans fell round you fighting for your body. There you lay in the whirling clouds of dust, all huge and hugely heedless now of your chivalry. We fought the whole of the livelong day, nor should we ever have left off if Jove had not sent a hurricane to stay us. Then, when we had borne you to the ships out of the fray, we laid you on your bed and cleansed your fair skin with warm water and with ointments. The Danaans tore their hair and wept bitterly round about you. Your mother, when she heard, came with her immortal nymphs from out of the sea, and the sound of a great wailing went forth over the waters, so that the Achaeans quaked for fear. They would have fled panic-stricken to their ships, had not wise old Nestor, whose counsel was ever truest, checked them, saying, "Hold, Argives, fly not, sons of the Achaeans. This is his mother coming from the sea with her immortal nymphs to view the body of her son." Thus he spoke, and the Achaeans feared no more. The daughters of the old man of the sea stood round you weeping bitterly, and clothed you in immortal raiment. The 9 Muses also came, and lifted up their sweet voices in lament, calling and answering one another. There was not an Argive but wept for pity of the dirge they chanted. Days and nights 7 and 10 we mourned you, mortals and immortals, but on the 18th day we gave you to the flames, and many a fat sheep with many an ox did we slay in sacrifice around you. You were burnt in raiment of the gods, with rich resins and with honey, while heroes, horse and foot, clashed their armor round the pile as you were burning, with a tramp as of a great multitude. But when the flames of heaven had done their work, we gathered your white bones at daybreak, and laid them in ointments and in pure wine. Your mother brought us a golden vase to hold them, gift of Bacchus and work of Vulcan himself. In this we mingled your bleached bones with those of Patroclus, who had gone before you, and separate we enclosed also those of Antilochus, who had been closer to you than any other of your comrades, now that Patroclus was no more. Over these the host of the Argives built a noble tomb, from a point jutting out over the open Hellespont, that it might be seen from far out upon the sea by those now living and by them that shall be born hereafter. Your mother begged prizes from the gods, and offered them to be contended for by the noblest of the Achaeans. You must have been present at the funeral of many a hero, when the young men gird themselves and make ready to contend for prizes on the death of some great chieftain. But you never saw such prizes as silver-footed Thetis offered in your honor, for the gods loved you well. Thus even in death your fame, Achilles, has not been lost, and your name lives evermore among all mankind. But as for me, what solace had I when the days of my fighting were done? For Jove willed my destruction on my return by the hands of Aegisthus and those of my wicked wife. Thus did they converse, and presently Mercury came up to them with the ghosts of the suitors who had been killed by Ulysses. The ghosts of Agamemnon and Achilles were astonished at seeing them, and went up to them at once. The ghost of Agamemnon recognized Amphimedon, son of Menelaus, who lived in Ithaca and had been his host, so it began to talk to him. "Amphimedon," it said, "what has happened to all you fine young men, all of an age too, that you come down here under the ground? One could pick no finer body of men from any city. Did Neptune raise his winds and waves against you when you were at sea? Or did your enemies make an end of you on the mainland when you were cattle lifting or sheep stealing, or while fighting in defense of your wives and city? Answer my question, for I have been your guest. Do you not remember how I came to your house with Menelaus to persuade Ulysses to join us with his ships against Troy? It was a whole month ere we could resume our voyage, for we had hard work to persuade Ulysses to come with us." And the ghost of Amphimedon answered, "Agamemnon, son of Atreus, king of men, I remember everything that you have said, and will tell you fully and accurately about the way in which our end was brought about. Ulysses had been long gone, and we were courting his wife, who did not say point blank that she would not marry, nor yet bring matters to an end, for she meant to compass our destruction. This then was the trick she played on us. She set up a great tambour frame in her room, and began to work on an enormous piece of fine needlework. 'Sweethearts,' said she, 'Ulysses is indeed dead. Still, do not press me to marry again immediately. Wait, for I would not have my skill in needlework perish unrecorded, till I have completed a pall for the hero Laertes, against the time when death shall take him. He is very rich, and the women of the place will talk if he is laid out without a pall.' This is what she said, and we assented, whereupon we could see her working upon her great web all day long, but at night she would unpick the stitches again by torchlight. She fooled us in this way for 3 years, without our finding it out, but as time wore on, and she was now in her 4th year, in the waning of moons and many days had been accomplished, one of her maids, who knew what she was doing, told us, and we caught her in the act of undoing her work. So she had to finish it whether she would or no, and when she showed us the robe she had made after she had had it washed, its splendor was as that of the sun or moon. Then some malicious god conveyed Ulysses to the upland farm where his swineherd lives. Thither presently came also his son, returning from a voyage to Pylos, and the two came to the town when they had hatched their plot for our destruction. Telemachus came first, and then, after him, accompanied by the swineherd, came Ulysses, clad in rags, and leaning on a staff as though he were some miserable old beggar. He came so unexpectedly that none of us knew him, not even the older ones among us, and we reviled him and threw things at him. He endured both being struck and insulted without a word, though he was in his own house. But when the will of aegis-bearing Jove inspired him, he and Telemachus took the armor and hid it in an inner chamber, bolting the doors behind them. Then he cunningly made his wife offer his bow and a quantity of iron to be contended for by us ill-fated suitors. and this was the beginning of our end, for not one of us could string the bow, nor nearly do so. When it was about to reach the hands of Ulysses, we all of us shouted out that it should not be given him, no matter what he might say. But Telemachus insisted on his having it. When he had got it in his hands, he strung it with ease, and sent his arrow through the iron. Then he stood on the floor of the cloister, and poured his arrows on the ground, glaring fiercely about him. First he killed Antinous, and then, aiming straight before him, he let fly his deadly darts, and they fell thick on one another. It was plain that some one of the gods was helping them, for they fell upon us with might and main throughout the cloisters, and there was a hideous sound of groaning as our brains were being battered in, and the ground seethed with our blood. This, Agamemnon, is how we came by our end, and our bodies are lying still uncared for in the house of Ulysses, for our friends at home do not yet know what has happened, so that they cannot lay us out and wash the black blood from our wounds, making moan over us to the offices due to the departed. Happy Ulysses, son of Laertes, replied the ghost of Agamemnon. You are indeed blessed in the possession of a wife endowed with such rare excellence of understanding, and so faithful to her wedded lord as Penelope, the daughter of Icarius. The fame, therefore, of her virtue shall never die, and the immortals shall compose a song that shall be welcome to all mankind, in honor of the constancy of Penelope. How far otherwise was the wickedness of the daughter of Tyndareus, who killed her lawful husband. Her song shall be hateful among men, for she has brought disgrace on all womankind, even on the good ones. Thus did they converse in the house of Hades, deep down within the bowels of the earth. Meanwhile, Ulysses and the others passed out of the town, and soon reached the fair and well-tilled farm of Laertes, which he had reclaimed with infinite labor. Here was his house, with a lean-to running all round it, where the slaves who worked for him slept and sat and ate, while inside the house there was an old Sicel woman who looked after him in this his country farm. When Ulysses got there, he said to his son and to the other two, "Go to the house and kill the best pig that you can find for dinner. Meanwhile, I want to see whether my father will know me, or fail to recognize me after so long an absence." He then took off his armor and gave it to Eumaeus and Philoetius, who went straight on to the house, while he turned off into the vineyard to make trial of his father. As he went down into the great orchard, he did not see Dolius, nor any of his sons, nor of the other bondsmen, for they were all gathering thorns to make a fence for the vineyard, at the place where the old man had told them. He therefore found his father alone, hoeing a vine. He had on a dirty old shirt, patched and very shabby. His legs were bound round with thongs of oxhide to save him from the brambles, and he also wore sleeves of leather. He had a goat-skin cap on his head, and was looking very woebegone. When Ulysses saw him so worn, so old and full of sorrow, he stood still under a tall pear tree and began to weep. He doubted whether to embrace him, kiss him, and tell him all about his having come home, or whether he should first question him and see what he would say. In the end, he deemed it best to be crafty with him. So, in this mind, he went up to his father, who was bending down and digging about a plant. "I see, sir," said Ulysses, "that you are an excellent gardener. What pains you take with it, to be sure! There is not a single plant, not a fig tree, vine, olive, pear, nor flower bed, but bears the trace of your attention. I trust, however, that you will not be offended if I say that you take better care of your garden than of yourself. You are old, unsavory, and very meanly clad. It cannot be because you are idle that your master takes such poor care of you. Indeed, your face and figure have nothing of the slave about them, and proclaim you of noble birth. I should have said that you were one of those who should wash well, eat well, and lie soft at night, as old men have a right to do. But tell me, and tell me true, whose bondsman are you, and in whose garden are you working? Tell me also about another matter. Is this place that I have come to really Ithaca? I met a man just now who said so, but he was a dull fellow, and had not the patience to hear my story out when I was asking him about an old friend of mine, whether he was still living, or was already dead and in the house of Hades. Believe me when I tell you that this man came to my house once when I was in my own country, and never did yet any stranger come to me whom I liked better. He said that his family came from Ithaca, and that his father was Laertes, son of Arceisius. I received him hospitably, making him welcome to all the abundance of my house, and when he went away, I gave him all the customary presents. I gave him 7 talents of fine gold, and a cup of solid silver with flowers chased upon it. I gave him 12 light cloaks, and as many pieces of tapestry. I also gave him 12 cloaks of single fold, 12 rugs, 12 fair mantles, and an equal number of shirts. To all this I added 4 good-looking women skilled in all useful arts, and I let him take his choice. His father shed tears and answered, "Sir, you have indeed come to the country that you have named, but it has fallen into the hands of wicked people. All this wealth of presents has been given to no purpose. If you could have found your friend here alive in Ithaca, he would have entertained you hospitably, and would have requited your presence amply when you left him, as would have been only right, considering what you had already given him. But tell me, and tell me true, how many years is it since you entertained this guest, my unhappy son as ever was? Alas, he has perished far from his own country. The fishes of the sea have eaten him, or he has fallen a prey to the birds and wild beasts of some continent. Neither his mother nor I, his father, who were his parents, could throw our arms about him and wrap him in his shroud. Nor could his excellent and richly dowered wife Penelope bewail her husband as was natural upon his deathbed, and to close his eyes according to the offices due to the departed. But now tell me truly, for I want to know, who and whence are you? Tell me of your town and parents. Where is the ship lying that has brought you and your men to Ithaca? Or were you a passenger on some other man's ship, and those who brought you here have gone on their way and left you?" "I will tell you everything," answered Ulysses, "quite truly. I come from Alybus, where I have a fine house. I am son of King Apheidas, who is the son of Polypemon. My own name is Eperitus. Heaven drove me off my course as I was leaving Sicania, and I have been carried here against my will. As for my ship, it is lying over yonder, off the open country outside the town, and this is the 5th year since Ulysses left my country. Poor fellow! Yet the omens were good for him when he left me. The birds all flew on our right hands, and both he and I rejoiced to see them as we parted, for we had every hope that we should have another friendly meeting and exchange presents. A dark cloud of sorrow fell upon Laertes as he listened. He filled both hands with dust from off the ground and poured it over his grey head, groaning heavily as he did so. The heart of Ulysses was touched, and his nostrils quivered as he looked upon his father. Then he sprang towards him, flung his arms about him, and kissed him, saying, "I am he, father, about whom you are asking. I have returned after having been away for 20 years. But cease your sighing and lamentation, for we have no time to lose. For I should tell you that I have been killing the suitors in my house, to punish them for their insolence and crimes." "If you really are my son, Ulysses," replied Laertes, "and have come back again, you must give me such manifest proof of your identity as shall convince me." "First, observe this scar," answered Ulysses, "which I got from a boar's tusk when I was hunting on Mount Parnassus. You and my mother had sent me to Autolycus, my mother's father, to receive the presents which, when he was over here, he had promised to give me. Furthermore, I will point out to you the trees in the vineyard which you gave me, and I asked you all about them as I followed you round the garden. We went over them all, and you told me their names and what they all were. You gave me 13 pear trees, 10 apple trees, and 40 fig trees. You also said you would give me 50 rows of vines. There was corn planted between each row, and they yield grapes of every kind when the heat of heaven has been laid heavy upon them." Laertes' strength failed him when he heard the convincing proofs which his son had given him. He threw his arms about him, and Ulysses had to support him, or he would have gone off into a swoon. But as soon as he came to, and was beginning to recover his senses, he said, "O Father Jove, then you gods are still in Olympus after all, if the suitors have really been punished for their insolence and folly. Nevertheless, I am much afraid that I shall have all the townspeople of Ithaca up here directly, and they will be sending messengers everywhere throughout the cities of the Cephallenians." Ulysses answered, "Take heart and do not trouble yourself about that, but let us go into the house hard by your garden. I have already told Telemachus, Philoetius, and Eumaeus to go on there and get dinner ready as soon as possible." Thus conversing, the two made their way towards the house. When they got there, they found Telemachus with the stockman and the swineherd cutting up meat and mixing wine with water. Then the old Sicel woman took Laertes inside and washed him and anointed him with oil. She put him on a good cloak, and Minerva came up to him and gave him a more imposing presence, making him taller and stouter than before. When he came back, his son was surprised to see him looking so like an immortal, and said to him, "My dear father, some one of the gods has been making you much taller and better looking." Laertes answered, "Would, by Father Jove, Minerva, and Apollo, that I were the man I was when I ruled among the Cephallenians, and took Nericum, that strong fortress on the foreland. If I were still what I then was, and had been in our house yesterday with my armor on, I should have been able to stand by you and help you against the suitors. I should have killed a great many of them, and you would have rejoiced to see it." Thus did they converse. But the others, when they had finished their work, and when the feast was ready, left off working, and took each his proper place on the benches and seats. Then they began eating. By and by old Dolius and his sons left their work and came up, for their mother, the Sicel woman who looked after Laertes, now that he was growing old, had been to fetch them. When they saw Ulysses, and were certain it was he, they stood there lost in astonishment. But Ulysses scolded them good-naturedly, and said, "Sit down to your dinner, old man, and never mind about your surprise. We have been wanting to begin for some time, and have been waiting for you." Then Dolius put out both his hands and went up to Ulysses. "Sir," said he, seizing his master's hand and kissing it at the wrist, "we have been long wishing you home, and now heaven has restored you to us, after we had given up hoping. All hail, therefore, and may the gods prosper you. But tell me, does Penelope know of your return, or shall we send some one to tell her?" "Old man," answered Ulysses, "she knows already, so you need not trouble about that." On this he took his seat, and the sons of Dolius gathered round Ulysses to give him greeting and embrace him one after the other. Then they took their seats in due order near Dolius their father. While they were thus busy getting their dinner ready, rumor went round the town, and noised abroad the terrible fate that had befallen the suitors. As soon, therefore, as the people heard of it, they gathered from every quarter, groaning and hooting before the house of Ulysses. They took the dead away, buried every man his own, and put the bodies of those who came from elsewhere on board the fishing vessels, for the fishermen to take each of them to his own place. They then met angrily in the place of assembly, and when they were got together, Eupeithes rose to speak. He was overwhelmed with grief for the death of his son Antinous, who had been the first man killed by Ulysses. So he said, weeping bitterly, "My friends, this man has done the Achaeans great wrong. He took many of our best men away with him in his fleet, and he has lost both ships and men. Now, moreover, on his return he has been killing all the foremost men among the Cephallenians. Let us be up and doing before he can get away to Pylos or to Elis, where the Epeans rule, or we shall be ashamed of ourselves for ever afterwards. It will be an everlasting disgrace to us if we do not avenge the murder of our sons and brothers. For my own part, I should have no more pleasure in life, but had rather die at once. Let us up, then, and after them, before they can cross over to the mainland." He wept as he spoke, and everyone pitied him. But Medon and the bard Phemius had now woke up, and came to them from the house of Ulysses. Every one was astonished at seeing them, for they stood in the middle of the assembly. And Medon said, "Hear me, men of Ithaca. Ulysses did not do these things against the will of heaven. I myself saw an immortal god take the form of Mentor and stand beside him. This god appeared, now in front of him, encouraging him, and now going furiously about the court and attacking the suitors, whereon they fell thick on one another. On this, pale fear laid hold of them, and old Halitherses, son of Mastor, rose to speak, for he was the only man among them who knew both past and future. So he spoke to them plainly and in all honesty, saying, "Men of Ithaca, it is all your own fault that things have turned out as they have. You would not listen to me, nor yet to Mentor, when he bade you check the folly of your sons, who were doing much wrong in the wantonness of their hearts, wasting the substance and dishonoring the wife of a chieftain who they thought would not return. Now, however, let it be as I say, and do as I tell you. Do not go out against Ulysses, or you may find that you have been drawing down evil on your own heads." That was what he said, and more than half raised a loud shout, and at once left the assembly. But the rest stayed where they were, for the speech of Halitherses displeased them, and they sided with Eupeithes. They therefore hurried off for their armor, and when they had armed themselves, they met together in front of the city, and Eupeithes led them on in their folly. He thought he was going to avenge the murder of his son, whereas, in truth, he was never to return, but was himself to perish in his attempt. Then Minerva said to Jove, "Father, son of Saturn, king of kings, answer me this question. What do you propose to do? Will you set them fighting still further, or will you make peace between them?" And Jove answered, "My child, why should you ask me? Was it not by your own arrangement that Ulysses came home and took his revenge upon the suitors? Do whatever you like, but I will tell you what I think will be the most reasonable arrangement. Now that Ulysses is revenged, let them swear to a solemn covenant, in virtue of which he shall continue to rule, while we cause the others to forgive and forget the massacre of their sons and brothers. Let them then all become friends as heretofore, and let peace and plenty reign." This was what Minerva was already eager to bring about, so down she darted from off the topmost summits of Olympus. Now, when Laertes and the others had done dinner, Ulysses began by saying, "Some of you go out and see if they are not getting close up to us." So one of Dolius' sons went as he was bid. Standing on the threshold, he could see them all quite near, and said to Ulysses, "Here they are. Let us put on our armor at once." They put on their armor as fast as they could. That is to say, Ulysses, his 3 men, and the 6 sons of Dolius. Laertes also and Dolius did the same, warriors by necessity in spite of their gray hair. When they had all put on their armor, they opened the gate and sallied forth, Ulysses leading the way. Then Jove's daughter Minerva came up to them, having assumed the form and voice of Mentor. Ulysses was glad when he saw her, and said to his son Telemachus, "Telemachus, now that you are about to fight in an engagement, which will show every man's mettle, be sure not to disgrace your ancestors, who were eminent for their strength and courage all the world over." "You say truly, my dear father," answered Telemachus, "and you shall see, if you will, that I am in no mind to disgrace your family." Laertes was delighted when he heard this. "Good heavens," he exclaimed, "what a day I am enjoying! I do indeed rejoice at it. My son and grandson are vying with one another in the matter of valor." On this, Minerva came close up to him and said, "Son of Arcesius, best friend I have in the world, pray to the blue-eyed damsel and to Jove her father, then poise your spear and hurl it." As she spoke, she infused fresh vigor into him, and when he had prayed to her, he poised his spear and hurled it. He hit Eupeithes' helmet, and the spear went right through it, for the helmet stayed it not, and the armor rang rattling round him as he fell heavily to the ground. Meanwhile Ulysses and his son fell upon the front line of the foe, and smote them with their swords and spears. Indeed, they would have killed every one of them, and prevented them from ever getting home again, only Minerva raised her voice aloud, and made everyone pause. "Men of Ithaca," she cried, "cease this dreadful war, and settle the matter at once without further bloodshed. On this, pale fear seized everyone. They were so frightened that their arms dropped from their hands and fell upon the ground at the sound of the goddess's voice, and they fled back to the city for their lives. But Ulysses gave a great cry, and gathering himself together, swooped down like a soaring eagle. Then the son of Saturn sent a thunderbolt of fire that fell just in front of Minerva. So she said to Ulysses, "Ulysses, noble son of Laertes, stop this warful strife, or Jove will be angry with you." Thus spoke Minerva, and Ulysses obeyed her gladly. Then Minerva assumed the form and voice of Mentor, and presently made a covenant of peace between the two contending parties. End of Book 24 and end of the Odyssey by Homer, as translated by Samuel Butler. Read by Dennis Sayers in Modesto, California, for LibriVox. Fall 2006.